welcome to episode 473 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with.
Grace Winburn.
Michael O'Malley.
In today's episode, we're going to be talking about movies that we saw this week in part one. And in part two, we will be continuing our Javier Bardem series with 2013's The Counselor, which I would say is, out of the movies that we've done so far, features the least of Javier Bardem. But
yeah, he kind of comes in and out of the movie. He makes some impression though.
He does make impressions. He's
Yeah.
You leave the movie going, Javier Bardem was in this.
Great hair.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Or do you mean his?
I mean, I don't have to be exclusive here. Like everybody's got great hair on this podcast.
Yeah.
Those who aren't like watching the YouTube stream are missing out on our excellent hair.
Do you want to see excellent hair? Does that appeal to you? Well, head over to our YouTube channel and subscribe.
And watch The Counselor.
And watch The Counselor, where Javier Bardem looks like he's doing an impression of Guy Fieri. but with Versace shirts. So, all right. Let's jump into the movies that we saw this week. Michael, I'm going to let you start since you have the newest release.
So speaking of Harry, wouldn't it be a wild situation if the United States had a civil war? Alex Garland thinks so. And so he made a movie called Civil War. So like Alex Garland, who did like Ex Machina and like Men,
Annihilation,
and then he was a screenwriter. I mean, he's written those movies, but as well as directed them. But before he was a director, he was a screenwriter for several, fairly high profile movies too, like 28 Days Later, which Civil War kind of resembles in reasons I'll get into in a second. So like, acclaimed director, spotty record in my opinion, but with some clear like highlights. Like I love Ex Machina. Annihilation's pretty good too. Like he's someone that I was interested in seeing, even though like I wasn't super interested in like what does Alex Garland think about the state of American politics right now?
Yeah.
And the good news is you leave that movie thinking, I don't know what Alex Garland thinks about the state of American politics right now. Because it's a movie that is meant to appear as if it's taking place like now or like somewhere around now, but it like goes out of its way to avoid very specific like cultural or political signifiers that would make it too connected to the moment. And I know a lot of people have not enjoyed that element of the movie and felt like it was a cop out. I, for one, think that the movie would have been worse if the movie were about, here's what Alex Garland thinks about Republicans and Democrats. I think that would have been silly and, I don't know. There's so many movies from like, let's say like the Trump administration that already feel dated because they were trying to do that exact thing. And I think that like ultimately he made the best choice here, which was instead of doing that, he's like so closed in to the perspective that he is that we don't really get the context that we need outside of some like vague stuff that only is confusing. Like Texas and California are on the same side of the Civil War, for example. And I mean, maybe all the like arms manufacturers in those states have taken over and decided to become like, a unified front or something. I don't know, but it's not really explained. And we don't really know what the stakes of the Civil War are, except that there's the Western Front, which is like California and Texas, like are basically winning the Civil War and are about to overtake the federal government in Washington, D.C. So that's all the context we really get. And what the movie is really about is almost like a road movie. And that's how it's like 28 Days Later, which if you've seen that movie, Cillian Murphy like wakes up in a hospital and it's a zombie apocalypse. And he and like a ragtag group of people have to like travel to this other place, right? And the movie is like a series of incidents as they travel to that place. That's 28 Days Later. And Civil War is kind of like that because we follow a group of journalists. So there's Kirsten Dunst is a journalist as well as I gotta look up the other people's names, but they're famous people as well. The lady who played Priscilla in the
Charlie Spinney.
Thank you. Yeah,
Understand.
she's like an aspiring journalist and sees Kirsten Dunst, who she like is her idol, and she's like, I gotta come with you. Um, and then the drama teacher in Lady Bird, what's his name? Uh, Stephen McKinley Henderson. He's also like a kind of old timer journalist, and they're all basically like war correspondents. Like they all have history in like, especially Kirsten Dunst's character in like covering like uh wars in other countries, and so now they're able to like sharpen their skills in America. And the road trip is they're in Philadelphia at the beginning of the movie, and they're like, okay, so shit's about to go down in Washington D.C., and it's looking like the federal government is going to collapse. So we got to go interview the president right before that happens, so that we can get the scoop on what the president thinks about being overturned, basically, and probably killed by the insurgent forces. Um, and so like they're all like photojournalists, so they're like taking pictures along this road trip as they try to go get to the president before the Western forces get there, so that they can get like the story of interviewing the president and ask him hard questions about like his policies and stuff like that.
That's
And
when he's gonna want to answer that.
what?
That seems like a horrible, like, because he's gonna want to answer hard questions about his policies as an insurgent force comes to kill him and take over the government.
Yeah, I think the idea is that like it's implied that he's not been like super open to journalists in the past, and so they're thinking that like this is his moment of vulnerability, where if we like get him in a room and there's nowhere else for him to go, maybe he'll talk. Um,
Hmm.
like people in the movie make that same observation that you make, which is that like, you know, A, you're gonna get killed trying to like go through the front line, and B, why would the president talk to you now? But they're insistent on like we got to go get the scoop, and so they go and like they just encounter various atrocities as they go, and like a big part of the movie is like hey, you know those things that you see happen in other countries, what if they're happening in America? And so you see like a mass grave of like people who have, it's implied, have been like war crimes out of existence by Jesse Plemons. You see that like in like next to like a suburban development, or you see like in front of a JC Penney there's like a exploded helicopter, and like so things like that, like a big part of the movie is like juxtaposing, okay, here's things that we have seen mediated through like journalism in other countries, and now you're seeing them in this movie. And I don't know how I feel about it, to be honest. Like I think a lot of it could be read as just kind of like exploitative and kind of crass, like,
Mhm.
hey, wouldn't it be messed up if you saw, like, I don't know, like the Lincoln Memorial get blown up, like there's like that sort of like element to it. And I'm not sure if there's like good intentions behind that, besides just like, man, things are dark. Um, but on the other hand, what the movie ends up being is kind of like a exploration of the ethics of being like a quote unquote like objective journalist in a war scene, because uh you know there's like moments where like they witness stuff that perhaps potentially they could intervene and stop, but instead they're taking pictures of it. um there's like a lot of like questions that are raised about like what's the point of us documenting atrocities. Like Kirsten Dunst has this big speech about like how I used to think that by taking pictures of like, I don't know, whatever, like Afghan people being brutalized in war, that would be a warning for America, and America wouldn't want to go to war because of that. But that didn't work. There's like things like that are kind of like, I don't know, questioning like what is the use of documenting something. There's also like a lot of this, or not a lot, there's a few scenes that like are kind of pointed about like how the movie doesn't like goes around like an ideology. Like there's a scene where these guys are like pinned down by like the sniper in a barn or something like that, and the journalists are there like trying to take pictures and stuff, and they're like, hey, which side are you on? And the guy's like, I'm not on a side, I'm trying not to be sniped by this guy. And they like can't get the guy to like, they're like, but you're a soldier, you're clearly in like you're invested, like just tell us like what are you fighting for? He's like, I'm fighting for not being shot by this guy, and so there's like a short-sightedness to like everybody in the movie, that makes like I think a lot of people have read as like kind of cowardice on Garland's part, where it's like he doesn't want to get into that, like some of these people might be MAGA or whatever. But and maybe that's the case. But I do think that it's interesting that like it's like a movie about journalists who struggle with like how involved do we get in a conflict? Like what are the ethics of taking a picture of a person being shot? Um, like what role does that play if we don't situate it within an ideological context? Like there's something interesting about the fact that the movie itself seems to be struggling with that same question, and I'm not sure if that's like Alex Garland just like not knowing what to do, or if that's like a on purpose thing. But I found it interesting. Like, and I'm not sure like if I'm gonna like this movie long term, but um, at the moment it's like interesting. It's also really, I think, tense, and there's some scenes that are really memorable in like just kind of horrifying ways. Like that scene with Jesse Plemons is like really, really intense, and it I think highlights that Alex Garland like is a really capable writer and director at like just pure like tension. And I think the movie succeeds at least on that level. Whether or not that's appropriate to do in a movie about like the United States being torn apart by a civil war, like I don't know, like is that kind of movie supposed to be fun? Is it supposed to be a thrill ride? I don't know, but this movie has elements of that, and I do think like I saw a review by A. Dowd that basically makes the point of like one interesting thing that this movie is doing is basically treating a domestic war zone like a lot of American media treats international war zones, right? Like so, like we may see like a movie in like set in like X like Middle Eastern or X Eastern European country with like kind of you know stuff going down that's like kind of awful and stuff, but it's in the context of like an entertaining Hollywood movie. And this movie kind of takes that and turns it back on America. Which again, like I'm not sure if that's intentional or not, but it is something that's interesting to me about the movie. Anyway, that's Civil War. It's been divisive, and I'm sure different people will feel differently than I do. But I thought it was worth seeing at least, even if I'm not sure where I land.
Yeah, I feel like if I'm gonna watch it, I'll probably catch it not in theaters. I'll just catch it like whenever it's streaming or whatever. Um,
That's
cause
fine.
yeah,
Yeah.
cause yeah, I don't know. I agree with the point you made at the beginning where a lot of like Trump era, let's speak to the politics movies don't really hit the nail on the head. They either feel like they miss the point completely or they're just kind of like feeding the anxieties of what I would constitute as like the uh educated NPR listening left, that it's just like feeding like to the anxieties that they have and just kind of working off of that. So it's not really saying anything profound. It's just kind of going to that realm.
Yeah, and I think like even when it's not specifically doing that, I think it does kind of cause some movies to like miss the forest for the trees. Like a movie that I think about a lot with that, which is I think is I still like this movie a lot as a whole, but I think like Spike Lee's Black Klansman, how
Hmm.
it ends with like footage of like the Charlottesville stuff.
Hmm.
I think that it's muddying what it's doing historically by like trying to make it um like hyper topical. Um
Yeah.
and I think that that honestly was a mistake in the movie in hindsight. And in the moment, it was simply upsetting to see that footage. And now it's like, as that footage has become essentially like a political meme, it feels like it's cheapened the movie.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that because yeah, I remember I remember seeing it the first time and then seeing it on the rewatch of Black Klansman, which is overall like pretty successful. Like it's a very like it hits its marks where it needs to hit its marks, and then it like kind of veers off in this whole like Spike Lee wants to make a message, which he normally does want to make a message, and he can do it effectively. This was just not one of his effective techniques to do it.
Yeah. Yes, I'll
Um,
say like I mean Civil War is a messy movie and it's not always like hitting the mark that I'm not even sure what the mark is supposed to be honest, but it's messy in ways that I think are interesting. But I could see it being messy in ways that people just think are terrible or roll their eyes at, which is I don't know. This movie's had a whole spectrum of
yeah,
responses.
the other concern I had for it was like you have like the kind of right wing movies that come out that just are like kind of feeding that, that point of view. And again, like I didn't really feel like this was necessarily feeding like the left point of view, but I'm kind of just like, I wish there was some point of view, like how you're describing it. I wish there was some point of view, because like if it's just kind of neutral, then you're just like, what the hell are we supposed to do with it?
Yeah, I don't think the thing is, it's just like a really difficult movie to read. Like, if you're going in thinking, what does Alex Garland think about politics? Like, and I think that the movie's just disinterested in that. And it doesn't mean it doesn't have a point of view, but like I said, it's more interested in using like the Civil War as a device to explore like ethical questions rather than like, I don't know. I could imagine a version of this movie directed by like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. There's a lot of this movie that I could imagine like being like directed by Jean-Luc Godard in like the 60s, like that kind of thing where he's kind of merging
I was
narrative and
I was
political
gonna say
stuff.
I was gonna say Zack Snyder. So
The two, but like it has that kind of like it's self-reflexive about the project of cinema and documentation, like Godard is. But I could imagine like Godard also being like, and here's where the Black Panthers were in the
Mhm.
Civil War, and here's where the '68 student revolution in France were doing at the time. Like, and this movie is not interested in that element of it, but I could imagine that being a much more like biting movie if it were done right. But I honestly don't trust Alex Garland to do it right, so I think I just would rather he not do it.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Well, Civil War, it's in theaters now. You can either watch Kirsten Dunst in Civil War or Kirsten Dunst in the re-release of Spider-Man 2 by Sam Raimi, which honestly I kind of want to go
Both
watch.
movies about journalists, struggling
Yeah.
journalists.
um in a movie that has no struggling journalist, I want to talk about An Autumn's Tale, which is currently on the Criterion Channel. Um It is directed by Mabel Chung, who is a filmmaker I'm not familiar with. This was the first of her films that I saw. But this was part of her, I want to say, immigrant or migrant trilogy, where she made films about Chinese people like assimilating into, I think, predominantly America, but there might have been another one that wasn't America. But anyway, so this one, you meet Lee Kay, who is played by Cherie Chung. She is a native of Hong Kong, and she moves to New York City. This movie is in 1980. Is from 1987, so late 80s New York. But she moves to Chinatown in New York City to attend college, and also see her boyfriend, who I guess has moved to New York as well. And so they connect her with her cousin, but it doesn't seem like, it's not a first cousin. It's kind of maybe a loose definition of cousin. Um, Played by Chow. His name's Samuel, and he's played by Chow Yun Fat, which is kind of cool to see Chow Yun Fat in a movie where he's not having to be like a martial arts expert or something. So that was kind of neat. Because this is very much like a rom-com romance movie, but um, uh, uh, Lee gets she gets to New York, and like immediately is like, let me roll up and see my boyfriend, and that dude's already with some other woman. And so she's heartbroken from that, and Samuel's there to kind of comfort her along, but she also doesn't really take him super seriously. He like spends most of his time like gambling. I think gambling. He's doing a lot of gambling. He's doing a lot of like odd jobs. He works at like a restaurant. He just is kind of he's like known in the neighborhood for doing a lot of different things. He like drives a cab. Um and and so the rest of the movie is just kind of her finding her way in New York, and him kind of initially, helping set a path for her, but then kind of tagging along and falling in love with her, which is why I think it's a very loose interpretation of the word cousin. I don't think we have like a Alabama situation going on here or something. And so but yeah, it's a really like, honestly, this is kind of one of those one movie it reminded me a lot of is Oh, what's her last name? Let me just do the Girlfriends from 1978. Yeah, Claudia Whale.
Oh yeah.
Her movie Girlfriends, which is also like kind of a comedy, woman moving to New York, kind of figuring things out, kind of thing. Um, and so yeah, just like on that level, it's just kind of like it's a really nice like New York movie, but it's a New York movie where you're getting a different perspective. Like it's not it's not a movie by like Woody Allen. Like you're not getting the same Woody Allen shit that you see in all the movies or something like that. Like this, you're kind of getting a different perspective. You're getting a different, also just like a different class of people. Like for the most part, the characters in the movie are relatively poor, but also like have found kind of a life here in Chinatown, and there's like a sense of community. Um, yeah, there's a kind of interesting like subplot storyline where Lee is looking for a job, and she starts doing this like babysitting gig, and um the mother of the couple whose child they're watching is Chinese also, but her husband is white, and it kind of and you kind of have like this interesting dynamic between um just how Lee is coming about things, and how this woman who clearly has been like in America for a minute is kind of seeing things and and being protective like of her child and stuff that she's coming in contact with. But overall, it's a very sweet movie. It has like a nice 80s soundtrack going. Um, I think that the two characters, like I said, Chow Yun Fat, who you normally see in like movies with like where he's uh like firing guns at people and doing kung fu and things like that, is just kind of like this kind of schlubby, goofy dude who like always has like an answer for everything, even if it makes no sense. Um, and yeah, I don't know. It's part of their like Asian, or I think Asian Americans in New York or something like that. A series for Criterion Channel that's there right now, and a bunch of these kind of just smaller movies um about about Chinese people immigrating to America, that's usually set like in the 80s to early 90s, that I think for the most part are kind of fly under the radar. And so, like I said before, like as you know, I think it's a really nice. I think we there's a lot of movies that you usually classify with New York, and Autumn's Tale, Girlfriends, a movie we did for Young Critics a number of years ago, Crossing Delancey, just kind of like nice um, non immediately go to New York City movies. They're kind of nice, and they just like add a rich perspective that you kind of miss after, again, like the 15th Woody Allen movie of him doing stuff in New York. So I recommend it if you have a Criterion Channel. But Autumn's Tale, good little romance. All right, Grace, I'm gonna toss it off to you.
Sure, I have another really fun, cozy romance. I'm being misleading. Klute, 1971's Klute, directed by Alan Pacuglia, starring Jane Fonda and Donna. Thank you. And we practiced that before we started recording. Starring Donald Sutherland and Jane Fonda. Donald Sutherland plays private investigator, special detective John Klute, who is hired by a family in a small town in Pennsylvania. The father of this family, Tom Gruneman, has gone missing. And after 6 months with no new leads, the family has reached out to John, who's a family friend, to help find Tom and bring him home. The only lead that they have right now is a typed written letter addressed to a call girl, an escort in New York named Bree Daniels. John Klute, he takes this letter and follows up with this lead. He goes to New York, he finds Bree, and starts to follow her. This movie is called Klute, but it's kind of honestly more about Bree. And Jane Fonda really steals the show. So Jane Fonda Bree, she is this call girl in New York. She turns tricks because she has all the control. Meanwhile, she's trying to go straight as an actress or a model, which is interesting. It's just her selling her body in another way to someone else. But when she's an escort, it's on her terms, which is what's so important. Bree thinks that she is being followed, thinks that she's being stalked, thinks that there's someone tapping her phones, watching her apartment, and she's very scared. This is a really paranoid movie, and it's also really frightening to watch as a young woman, because I too have had those thoughts that, when I'm out late at night, somebody's watching me. Somebody's following me. It could be literally anyone. And there's also this added layer of panic to it, because she's just a woman alone in New York, and she's one in a million. How could anybody zero in on her? And the person who's really following her, it does turn out to be Klute. He's tapping her phones. He's following her around New York because he's following up this lead, convinced that perhaps she will lead him to Gruneman. But this is also like a really interesting take on a noir movie. There's the detective, the hard-boiled. He's very quiet. We don't get a whole lot out of him. There's voiceovers, but the voiceovers are from the perspective of Bree, so we get a little more into her psychology than we would into Klute's psychology, or into his mindset. The two develop a relationship, but it's one that Bree is really unable to accept, as she's so used to being in control of all of her relationships, when they meet, where they meet, for how much, what they do. And this is like a real romantic relationship, but it's also a little tricky because he is following up on her. He is tapping her phones. He rented out an apartment in her basement so he can follow her every move. So there's this weird sort of, obsession, but it's all to find this missing person. There's a shocking and terrifying twist, and I don't know how much I want to say, because I think that this is just so worth watching. This movie is what happens when your paranoid delusions are validated. Like, are you vindicated in that when there is someone following you, when there is someone tapping your phone? Like, how would that make you feel? Like, yes, I was right. Someone wanted to kill me. Like, what do you do with that? How do you cope with that? As I say, like, Jane Fonda really steals the show for me. I mean, she's beautiful. She's vulnerable. When she has these conversations with her psychiatrist about her relationship with her work, about, with her sex work, there's this real feeling of sort of desperation. Like, what else am I supposed to do? How else am I supposed to take care of myself? I don't want to be doing these things. I'm a vulnerable member of society with zero protection. I'm at the mercy of these absolute strangers as much control as I think I have over these situations. Really, there's no telling, because it could be that the, John you're going to meet up is an absolute psycho, and he could hurt you, or worse, kill you. There's a really great soundtrack to all of this, really moody, and this forlorn horn. Like, there's the trumpets, and it's so moody. It's terrifying. There's a lot to do with phone calls being recorded and taped, and these conversations, they come back up and they're replayed for you. And it's like, how terrifying and how invasive that is. Someone watching your most intimate moments in your home or on the job, listening to your most intimate moments over the phone. It's absolutely chilling. And by the end of it, you kind of get this feeling that while Bree has escaped this world of sex work and sexually motivated violence, she could return to it at any time because it's what she knows and it's what she still has control over. Donald Sutherland was kind of a sleeper for me. Just quiet, steady, even keeled, and definitely very heroic in this, and really gives Jane Fonda free reign to cry and snot all over the place. There's this one scene where she just, no, she does. She just completely breaks down and it breaks your heart. She's listening to the last known voice recording of a dear friend of hers before her friend is murdered. There's this like snuff quality to it, and she can hear it, and she realizes that this could potentially be her last moment as well, and just loses everything. She starts crying, drools a little snot comes down, and it's like, yeah, it's not pretty, but I mean, it's just like, what a performance. So physical. Really loved it. I was terrified. I had to turn on all my lights in my house because, like, what if there's somebody watching me right now? Klute, check it out. It's on Tubi with commercials, so you can like run and do stuff and then come right back, and it's like kind of watching a movie on TV again, But
have you seen? Is the movie like kind of? Because there's like All the President's Men and Parallax View and all that, kind of in the vein of those sort of like 70s paranoid thrillers.
Yes, it's exactly like that. It's in that same vein. It deals with, I think that it deals with like a really unique form of like paranoia and delusion, because I mean, it puts like female paranoia and at the forefront. Like, I'm terrified to go out at night like any other normal woman. I'm constantly looking over my shoulders. I am concerned about any man that I come into contact with. And to watch this movie, it's set in 1971, and it's like, what has changed? Absolutely nothing. And then add that layer of being a sex worker in such a vulnerable position. And I also thought it was so interesting that throughout people can pick up on Brie that she is a sex worker. It's like, how do you know? Like, they kind of just give her this knowing look like, oh, I know what you are. And you're not welcome.
Maybe they just
here.
assume that of all women that are by themselves.
All beautiful women by themselves. Well, we're not. We're not. Unless, of course, we are, but we're not, all of us. But this movie definitely like affirms, like when we say all men, like, yes, all men. I'm so sorry I'm speaking to these two men here on this podcast, but like, we do mean all men. Like, there is just that capacity, and there is that, instinctual fear. But this is, all in all, still a really great movie. And I think that everybody should check it out and watch it. So I hope that you do.
Well, is having somebody possibly following you and putting somebody you love in harm's way pique your interest? Have we got a movie for you? Stick around.
Do you have feelings about women?
Yeah,
Do you have
movie
complex and mixed feelings about women?
Do you think that women are just sex objects? Well, do we have a movie for you? The Counselor, after this short break. And we're back with part 2 of episode 473 of Cinematary. In this part, we're going to be continuing our Javier Bardem series with 2013's The Counselor, directed by Ridley Scott from a script by Cormac McCarthy. The film stars Michael Fassbender, Penelope Cruz, Cameron Diaz, Brad Pitt, and Javier Bardem. A Bentley driving Texas lawyer appears to have it all, including a beautiful fiancée named Laura, but his financial needs force him to become involved in an ill-advised drug deal. His partners in the venture include middleman Westray, shady nightclub owner Rayner, and Malkina, Rayner's sociopathic lover. Unsurprisingly, the counselor's deal spirals out of control, placing both him and Laura in mortal danger. Ridley Scott told the Toronto Sun that the counselor should have been, quote, fucking huge, opening to at least $50 million at the box office. The counselor bombed with a quote. The counselor bombed with a Wait, hold on. Excuse me. This is not a quote. The counselor bombed with a $7.8 million opening weekend, had an estimated $25 million budget, and ended its domestic run at just under 17 million. Quote, I really love The Counselor, which should have been fucking huge. With that cast, we should have had a $50 million weekend. After the marketing and advertising on that, I was ready to kill somebody. You don't preview films like that. You keep them in a box. It's Ridley Scott, y'all. He was going through stuff. His brother had just died. Armani was enlisted to create the wardrobes for the characters portrayed by Michael Fassbender and Penelope Cruz. In addition to Armani, designer Paula Thomas also contributed to the film's wardrobe by dressing Cameron Diaz's character Malkina with roughly 15 different outfits. Quote, it wasn't until I read the script that I realized why Ridley Scott called upon me. Cameron's character has a lot of elements of a Thomas Wilde, her own design label woman. She's bold, edgy, modern. She's about wanting to be seen as opposed to blending into the background. For Javier Bardem's character, costume designer Yanti Yates applied a widely colorful wardrobe that was mostly made up of pieces of Versace. As for Bardem's hair, the idea was the actor's own and inspired by film producer Brian Grazer's hairdo. Which just, do yourself a favor and Google Brian Grazer, and he nailed it. Javier Bardem talking to the Denver Post about his character, quote, I based all of my character on a line that he repeats constantly in the script, which is, I don't know, I don't want to know. The glasses also come from there. I don't really think he needs glasses, but he wears those glasses with different colors because he doesn't want to see the real world. Also, I wanted to have something in his look, which was the hair, that shows you he's not holding any values or any ideas. The way he dresses, too, he has to be really out there. It's a very free character in some ways, but he's also very stuck in his own fears. So what he's showing the world, the way he wants to be perceived, is the opposite. It's like a man in character. Javier Bardem talking about the infamous car sex scene with Cameron Diaz, quote, it wasn't just another day at the office. Of course it's so, I don't think beautifully is the word, amazingly written, the details and images. When I read that scene, it came to me organically, the need of playing that scene. It's funny, but it also shows the fear of my character towards her and towards their relationship. I tell you, it was a brilliant scene, and we had a lot of fun doing it, all of us. First, I did it with Michael, and then I did it with Cameron. The New York Times in 2013 said, Mr. Scott's seriousness isn't always well served by the scripts he films, but in Mr. McCarthy, he has found a partner with convictions about good and evil rather than canned formula. The movie's title may make cruel sense. The counselor is a man who himself takes no counsel, but a truer encapsulation of its world is no exit. And in 2013, the LA Times said, as cold, precise, and soulless as the diamonds that figure briefly in its plot, The Counselor is an extremely unpleasant piece of business. Though the film is ably directed and the cast is impressive, everyone here is the prisoner of the counselor's clumsy puppet master, screenwriter Cormac McCarthy, who's apparently been eager to write directly for the screen for some time, but should have stifled the impulse. On that note, let's talk about The Counselor.
You were right about Brian Grazer.
Did you Google it? Yeah.
I did, yeah.
That man goes out with that hair on a regular basis.
Yeah, no way.
But he has millions of dollars and is a well recognized film producer, so whatever.
Good for him.
Yeah. Michael, what did you think of The Counselor? Had you seen this before?
No, this is my first time. I remember when it came out, and I also remember it being panned. And it almost, I don't know. I mean, this was whatever, 10 years ago or 9 years ago or whenever this came out. It was one of those movies that immediately people were like, wow, this is a bad movie. And those sorts of movies, as I've gotten older, I've always been like, wait, is it a bad movie? The kind of consensus, bad movies. And I do not think it's a bad movie. I didn't love it. I mean, there are some people out there who really go to bat for this movie. And I don't love it, but it was interesting, and I don't know, that dissonance that one of the reviewers talked about between or not dissonance, but the seriousness of Ridley Scott's direction. I think the screenplay is very silly and funny at times, and it's interesting, like how, like for instance, that like car scene, like that's, I don't know, like such a strange and silly scene, but it's also done in this like portentous way. Like Javier Bardem is like recounting it with horror, right? And there's a lot of this movie. It kind of reminds me of a lot of Cormac McCarthy in the sense of like the scope of the story is about like these grand philosophical stuff, and you get, of course, like the like cartel guys like philosophizing and like stuff by the end of the movie. Like there's that, but then on a character moment, like moment by moment, like there's a lot of it that's really funny and silly and like just kind of darkly comic when it's not just overtly silly. Like everyone's telling Michael Fassbender, like, don't do this deal, man. It's gonna go bad. Don't do this deal. And Michael Fassbender's like, I'm gonna do this deal. And then it goes bad, like immediately.
And then he's like, what should I do?
You know?
Like, we can't tell you.
Like there's something like really funny about that. It kind of reminds me of like No Country for Old Men with like just the like kind of clueless idiot that like starts the ball rolling in that movie, you know, and that book. So I don't know, like I like that it's this movie that has this like veneer of like we're telling like a serious crime story with like big dark themes, but then like you can take an individual scene and like there's silly stuff. Brad Pitt's funny in this movie. Like he's wearing a big old, like the way Brad Pitt is dressed, like my gosh. And Javier Bardem, of course, like with his, I don't know. I found a lot of the individual elements of this movie funny and entertaining. I have questions about some of the larger themes, and like I'll be honest, like I've not read a ton of Cormac McCarthy, but I've read like three of his novels, and the themes and plot on some level just kind of feel like Cormac McCarthy on autopilot. Like, oh, he's writing about like the inescapability of violence and like human folly of trying to resist that, and like he's written about that like 10 times. So I don't feel like this is like a valuable contribution to like his body of work. But if you were going to make a movie that Cormac McCarthy wrote, like this feels like the kind of movie that would come out of it.
Yeah. Grace, what about you?
I feel almost like exactly the opposite. So I also didn't really like this when I saw it. I just saw it for the first time. This is my first watch. I didn't really know what to expect. I too also remember it coming out. I had no idea what it was about. I guess in my mind, I hear the counselor and I thought it was like a marriage counselor because I'm
me
seeing
too,
all
actually.
of these. I'm seeing all of these hot actors and I assume that they're all married and they're all going to like Michael Fassbender for marriage advice or like counseling
They
in
should
their
have,
divorces
though.
or
They
something.
should have.
What a different
like,
movie that would have been.
And that almost, I wonder if that would have been any more interesting. But I felt
Well,
like,
in a way, Javier Bardem recounting the car sex scene to him is a bit like feels like counseling.
yeah, like,
You could have
hey,
kept that
my
scene in the
girl
movie
just
with the marriage
my girl just had
counselor.
sex with my
Yeah.
car. What do I do? Like, what is that? Like, what
And
do
we'll
we
just
do now?
real quickly for those who have not seen this movie, there's a sequence in the film where Javier Bardem's character is recounting this sexual experience that he's had with his girlfriend, who's the Cameron Diaz character, to Michael Fassbender, in which she takes her underwear off, gets on top of his Ferrari, and starts like rubbing on the Ferrari, saying, "I'm gonna fuck your car."
The windshield of the Ferrari, so
And
that
she does.
Javier Bardem
She
gets
does.
like a
It's like up on glass.
yeah.
Like, it's
With a
like
little squeegee, like you just hear like the
There is a
squeegee
sound effect. I was not prepared for the sound
I was
effect.
not prepared. What the way that Javier, like the way that Rainier says, he's like, it's like a catfish when they skim on the glass, like going up the glass. It's like, that's so mean. That's so cruel. That's your
I do
girl.
think-
I
okay.
can't believe you're talking about her like that.
We were talking about this off mic, but I think it bears repeating. Like, I think this is a deeply misogynist movie. Like, I don't think this is commenting on misogyny. I think this is just a misogynist movie.
Well, yes.
And maybe it's both, but I think this is a misogynist movie.
Well, yeah, because like Laura, she's beautiful, she's pure, she's pious, and the counselor is this corrupting force in her life. Like their first scene together is them in bed together and him asking her in explicit terms what she wants him to do to her, and she's very playful and a little shy about it, and he is of course, a lawyer. So he's like, no, explicitly, I need an affidavit, a signed affidavit of all the things that you want me to do to you. And it's just so.
It's really hot and steamy.
It's not. It's so.
That was a hell of an awkward scene to open the movie with.
Yeah, it's so unsexual. That like this is supposed to be like a really like sexy movie, and it's just not. Like I find Michael Fassbender to be just like completely neutered and devoid of all sexuality and sensuality. I didn't like him in this. I didn't really like any of these performances. I feel like these are all really interesting characters, and I don't really feel like anybody filled them out too well, especially not Fassbender as the counselor. I thought that he was just, I couldn't stand him. I'm like, enough of this. I would much rather see more of Rainier, more of West Ray. I feel like they gave a nuanced character performance. And Fassbender, you just see so much of his teeth when he smiles. But anyways, I digress. I do think that this is like a deeply misogynistic movie. And so back to the original point, Laura as this beautiful, pure, pious virgin, and then Malinka as, or Malinka, is it Malinka? Malinka?
She's from
Cameron
Barbados.
She's from Barbados with the name like.
So if
yeah.
you could please use her name correctly, Cameron Diaz, the person from Barbados.
The person,
I
Malinka.
forgot that she was from Barbados because she doesn't play it like that at all. Like, thankfully,
She did. I read
she
that she
does?
did. She had an accent, like accent, like she was from Barbados. I think it's called. I can't. I don't know, but a Barbados.
It could have been as offensive as what she was probably doing. So
yeah, and it tested really poorly, and they're like, you have to redub your lines.
Yikes.
And
I'm so glad that they did that actually, because I was about to say
tell.
credit to her for not doing that.
You can hear it a little bit, like
can
occasionally, like she'll
it.
say a word, you can kind of
You can see the placement of the accent in her mouth over these like dubbed with these dubbed lines, how they don't match up in certain ways. But yeah, she plays this devious, deadly femme fatale, and she and her sexually explicit nature is in direct conflict with Laura's more demure and pure ignorant, virginal ways, especially
not just
when
that
religion is concerned as well.
And it's not just that her sexually explicit nature is in conflict with Laura, it's that the movie is essentially conflating like her sexual desire and like the violence and havoc she like creates in the film. Like there's a true like femme fatale in the sense of like her sexuality and her like vivacious appetites are part and parcel with her crime and her like callousness toward like other people. And that's, I don't know. I don't know about that one, Cormac.
They're deadly. They're her instincts. And then, it's paired so nicely with this other wild animal. She's this wild thing that can't be tamed, but can only act within her nature, which is to drink and fuck and kill. And I guess then
that's like her
cheetahs. Yeah. She even has spots on her tattoos. She's got spots, Cheetah never changes her spots. But she's an intelligent woman and a plugged in woman. And that's also the opposite of Laura, who is ignorant and trusting of everything the counselor does. But and I really like Rainier's line where he says, I like intelligent women, but it's an expensive hobby. I amen to that, right?
Especially if your intelligent woman is creating international crime.
Yeah.
I like I don't know, like friendship or whatever it is between him and Michael Fassbender's character, where like the bulk of the first part of the movie is just them meeting up and him just telling sex stories, sexual exploits. And then the shit hits the fan, and then that kind of dissipates. I'm like, it's too, at one point you're talking about how your girlfriend left you for another woman, and then you had drinks with his with her the person she left you with's boyfriend who played for the Houston Oilers, which isn't a football team anymore. So that line didn't even make any sense.
Maybe he was really
And
old, like he had played for the Houston Oilers, like in the 80s.
yeah, I'm just like I don't know if that makes any sense. So you get that, and then it's Michael Fassbender running around going, "What should I do?"
I do think like I understand what you're saying, Grace, and like I acknowledge that what you say is true. But for me, there is something fascinating in the movie about just how much Michael Fassbender is just like a little worm in this movie, just like a little pathetic worm. Like he is, and I think there's a lot of interesting like meta stuff going on with the actors in this movie as well. Like Michael Fassbender is like a character, like an actor with a certain amount of gravitas to him usually in roles, like whether that's like something like the uh
Shame.
oh, what was the movie that he did where he was in prison, Hunger,
Yeah,
right? Like whether it's something like Hunger or whether it's something like even more like in Prometheus or something, like all of those movies are like big, like I'm a serious actor sort of role. And like it's fascinating that he plays this just like sniveling, like foolish man in this movie who like is not charismatic at all. Like that feels like it almost has to be like a choice either on Ridley Scott's part or on Fassbender's part himself to make like an actor who is kind of like known for a certain kind of like charisma and screen presence to like totally reject that. And I think like Javier Bardem is kind of interesting too, because obviously the other Cormac McCarthy connection with Javier Bardem is Anton Segura in No Country for Old Men. Like iconic, like probably most Americans' first time like noticing Javier Bardem as an actor. And like how in control like he is that whole movie, and then he in this movie like basically plays subordinate to another kind of like creature of like like uh like a force of nature basically. Like, and I think Cameron Diaz is not nearly as good of a character, or as like I don't know, the script does not respect her in the same way that it respects Sigur. But like they both kind of have the same role in the sense of like this is this like unstoppable like force that people think that they can work around and control, but it is impossible. And so like Javier Bardem as an actor is asked to like play a role that's subordinate to like the role that he played in the previous Cormac McCarthy adaptation that he was in. And like in the opposite way, like instead of like really terrible like bowl cut hair, he's got like a wild like Hollywood producer hair, and he's got like designer clothes, and like he's like flamboyant and like you know like intensely like physical and embodied, as opposed to like being like basically like a like a demigod kind of figure like he is in No Country for Old Men. Like I don't know, like I thought those were all interesting choices. Like I don't know if it makes like a good movie, but like I wasn't bored by this movie. I think
uh,
it's
I don't know.
was
I got pretty bored.
Yeah,
yeah.
I was a little bored. I think that McCarthy's writing, and from what I understand of him and what I take away from him, is he writes action so well, and that it's so vivid on the page, and that it translates so well onto the screen, and that the violence that he writes and puts forth on the page, it does a lot of the talking, and it speaks volumes, and the action is the philosophical musings. I felt like this was so conversational and so dialogue heavy, and every line had some sort of something to some sort of something for you to pull out and analyze, some sort of extended metaphor to ruminate on. And it wasn't like this straightforward like drug deal gone wrong, gone sideways, and the instances of violence are they're pretty quick and they're spread out, it just wasn't so well paced for me, that I got a little bored, and I got a little like, what's the whole deal with like it also took me a second of like, oh, is that the truck that's bringing the drugs? This like
The poop truck.
Yeah, I was a little bit
I was
confused.
a little confused. So it did kind of bore me a little. Like but what kept my attention was Brad Pitt as Westray, um, the and the and two big parallels that stuck out for me: the beheading, the garroting of
Yeah.
that Green Hornet character, how that parallels Westray's beheading, and then two lines having to do with worlds, how everybody lives in a different world. That maybe that's another thing. Like everybody kind of just like exists in their own character's world, and they all kind of collide or they all kind of like orbit each other, but nothing felt really cohesive. Malenka and Laura are sitting around and they're talking about the ring and the jewelry and their sexuality and the world that they live in. And Malenka says, "What a world!" And Laura says, "You really think the world is that crazy?" And Malenka says, "I meant your world." And then again later on, when the drug dealer is speaking to the counselor, he says, "This world that you created will end with you." So it's like everybody makes their own world with all the choices that they make. And these worlds that they make are almost like completely independent from everybody else's, and you have to suffer the consequences that you made for yourself within your world. But yeah, like that's what a wonderful musing on morality, but
I
that's
thought you were gonna say what a
boring.
wonderful. I thought you were gonna get real Louis Armstrong and
What
be
a
like, "What a
What a
wonderful
wonderful
world."
world. No, that's boring. Come on. Like, like where's the action? Where this is just so it's so I got lost. I like picked up my phone about halfway through. I was like, okay, I don't know what's going on. So that's just me though. What you guys?
It sounds like it's both of y'all, which is fine. Like I also got lost with the plot, but I don't know. Maybe it's just like I think it's interesting when people kind of reject movies and don't like them, like people didn't like The Counselor. And that usually means that there's something like off about the movie, like something that like either defies audiences' expectations or some sort of execution thing that didn't quite work. And like there's something going on in this movie that does feel like off kilter, and it feels like not everyone like it feels a little like sloppy
I
and
I feel like I'm not a Cormac McCarthy expert, but I feel like it's a much more cerebral movie, and like Ridley Scott is unable to handle the cerebral. I just I'll be I don't I think Ridley Scott's just not that great at
he is
directing.
overrated. Like he's still like people act like he's some master, but they say that because he did Blade Runner and Alien. Like
Yeah,
he's so inconsistent outside of those
but
two
like
movies.
I was telling Grace, like honestly, like if his brother, if Tony made this movie, it'd be way more interesting. It would be way more
Oh, and
cerebral.
It's
there's
just
parts
shot
where
and
he's
verse shot
trying to do,
conversation. Like that's nothing.
Well, that and
but there are parts when it feels like he's trying to do like a Tony Scott movie, like where there'll
yeah,
be
there
like
is.
a character running in, like the score will kind of get like more intense and stuff.
Well, like that's where like it's a whole. So Tony committed suicide like in the middle of filming this, like while he was filming this. So like he left for an extended period of time, dealt with that, and then came back. And so yeah, like part of this kind of feels like him almost doing Tony Scott to a degree. And you're like, yeah, you're not your brother though. Like,
Yeah,
it just doesn't work. But I felt like just the script itself, like it feels like a very it feels like a very very bookish script. Like it's very talky. It's very like we've talked about, it's getting into like these large like philosophizing moments like that doesn't always translate to film very well.
yeah.
And I felt like it needed somebody like the Coen brothers were perfect with No Country for Old Men because they can do cerebral. Like they can shoot the hell out of a scene and like make it like make you feel something
Well,
outside
they
of
can
just
also
the
do
talking.
cerebral in the context of there being kind of wacky shit too.
Yeah, and I just don't think
Yeah.
I just don't think Ridley Scott is he just seems incompatible with the material. So that's why like I don't think it's necessarily like a expectations thing. I think it's just a weird confluence of like Ridley Scott who does whatever he does well, and then Cormac McCarthy doing his thing, and that doesn't seem to really match. Grace, you were saying something?
Yeah, go ahead, Grace.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, like, what you said, they can do the cerebral and the funny. Like, a lot of the funny stuff fell so flat for me because I just didn't find Michael Fassbender to have any sort of charm or charisma in the choices that he made to play the counselor. I mean, like that whole interaction between him and the woman that he's representing, that inmate, she acts
Rosie
circles
Perez.
around him. She was tough as nails and terrifying with an attitude, bucking right up against this smart-ass sarcastic line that he's supposed to deliver. And it's just, he feels so awkward. Like, he just, like,
Well, you
Should
kind of
have
need.
switched out Rosie Perez for the Cameron Diaz role.
yeah, make her Malenka. Like,
Well,
I,
like you almost needed somebody like, like going back to the Coen brothers, like Michael Fassbender doesn't make sense. You needed somebody who's kind of like can play like sexy, but can also be kind of like a doofus. Like it's like Brad Pitt could have handled that role. He's in a different role, but he could have handled that role. George Clooney could handle that role. Like you need somebody who's kind of hot and dumb. And Michael Fassbender doesn't really do that.
But I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is that like I acknowledge like all this stuff, but there's something kind of like interesting about. I guess for me, the reason I didn't get bored is that the movie feels like people wearing like the movie feels like it's wearing clothes that don't fit it, and like every aspect of the movie like feels kind of like that. Like it would be, I don't know. There's something kind of like fascinating about the way that ill-fitting clothes hang on people or are tight on people in places, and like I don't know. I guess I was just interested in that. Like again, like I thought it was like interesting and funny that Michael Fassbender was such a like bad screen presence. Like something had to have happened for that to have happened because he's not normally a bad screen
Yeah.
presence.
Well, Grace and I were talking off mic before we started about so Cameron Diaz made this movie, and she made a bunch of choices in this movie, whether you agree with them
100%.
or not.
Yeah.
And then she proceeded to make 3 other movies and has not made a movie since. And like it's Cameron Diaz, like really big star. Like even
She
like
shot her shot and
yeah. And so like
left.
I was telling Grace, it was just like she just put everything in this movie. It was just like 110%. And then after that, it was like I'll just sleepwalk through a couple rom-coms and I'm out of here. I'm done. Hadn't been in a movie in 10 years.
And I say good for her. Probably for the best that we didn't get the patois cut of the movie with her,
Yeah.
but I don't know. I don't really know any other way to say it, but what y'all think of Javier Bardem compared to the other Javier Bardem movies? Because I hadn't seen the other two
Well,
that y'all
he,
talked
he
about.
at least got to have fun.
Yeah.
I like what you said about the ill-fitting clothes because everything about him. So what we talked about in Beautiful, Zach, you had mentioned that Javier Bardem, he said that his approach to acting is he has to get it right in the body. And you touch a lot on that, Michael, about his physicality and his presence inside his body and like how his body then informs these performances that he gives. So what you called him like this demagogue. I saw him as sort of like an automaton whose like only objective is to just kill everything,
Yeah.
in No Country. But then in this, there's definitely this like youthful, relaxed energy about him, but it does feel really forced. Like you're too old, like old man in the party section at the club. Like, I mean,
The hair's
yeah,
perfect for that, to be honest. Like,
yeah, he really nailed that, and he can do so much with so little. That he like definitely makes an impression. Like right out the gate, you're immediately like, who is that? What is that? Who is this character? And then he has the body and the energy to match it. It's like he's some hypersexual old man with like a young girlfriend, Malenka, and then he's this older guy with like the youthful clothes, and it's like you're not
Opening
really sure.
clubs.
Yeah, like opening these clubs, and the way he kind of moves, he's like when there's a dance floor and he like busts out some moves, and it's like that's kind of awkward too. Like it all feels really forced, but it still felt true to this Rainier person that like is smart in a way that he can make deals and make a business happen, but he's also smart enough to surround himself with people that are smarter than him to like lean on them. And there's definitely an awareness of like, I know I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but then that makes me smarter than everybody else because I'm not underestimating anybody. And he does a really good job. I was sad when they killed him. I was like, no.
Yeah, he's not in this movie enough.
Yeah,
He's pretty fun.
he's
And
really fun to watch.
in the context of the series, it is good to see him like have a good time after not
After
having a good
Beautiful.
time. Well, and See Inside, he's not having a good
Oh,
time.
I
in
didn't see that one.
too. So he hasn't had a good time yet. He's having a good time now.
He can do a lot with a little, and when he has a lot, he can do even more and go above and beyond. He's exceptionally talented and an actor that certainly makes a splash in any scene that he's in, and can play off everyone really well. He there's a really good energy between him and Fassbender, between him and Cameron Diaz. I would have liked for him to play a little opposite Laura, and play opposite his wife, Miss Penelope, and see what that was like.
We'll see her. We'll see her do that next week. I'm dropping in the chat for this. Isn't helpful for the listeners, but this is a picture of Javier Bardem in Lyle Crocodile, which I feel like we should have watched for this series.
Is he?
I hope he's having fun in that one.
Is he a crocodile?
He sure as hell better have fun. It's a picture. I'll let
Oh
y'all.
my gosh, no way.
The picture with him, he has like frumpy hair. He's wearing Florida Gators gear.
Yeah, I was not expecting it to be as gator focused. He knows it's a crocodile movie, right?
Ha!
Yeah, I think so. He's in his goofball era because if you look at like the Little Mermaid adaptation from last year, also I think I think he plays King Triton. Let me look.
Oh really?
I'm just like
he's over here. He's over there. He's over here. He's a Mother. I really liked him in Mother.
Yeah, we should have done Mother for this series.
Yeah, here's he has real flowy hair in Little Mermaid.
Dune.
So is hair a thing? Is he known for like having like interesting hair in movies?
The man loves his hair.
It's starting to, and I like that. I like an actor that uses every inch of their body to convey a character. I really admire that. He can like disappear into a costume and a wig, and then that will then inform this character that he puts forth. I admire that. He's an actor that uses everything, all of the tools at his disposal. It's not just the voice, it's not just your body, it's also your hair, your eyes, your mouth, your hands, I don't know. It's everything.
Yeah. And I do think for better or for worse, I mean, your mileage may vary, but he gets the most memorable scene in the movie recounting the car. He's not in this movie a lot, but he drops that scene for sure.
Yeah. If you're not going to watch the movie, you can at least. I don't think you really need context.
It's standalone, like it's a little short film.
Just go on YouTube and look up car scene, the counselor, and
YouTube will do the rest.
But you do need him recounting it and then kind of asking Michael Fassbender what he thinks of it, and Michael Fassbender being like, I don't know, and he's like, I don't know, like just forget I even said anything. Just never mind.
I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry I brought it up.
That didn't happen. I was just saying, like, what if?
Yeah. Any quick final thoughts on the counselor before we wrap up? Grace is like, nah, man.
I had quick final thoughts on Beautiful, but now that that's sat with me a little more, but that's not really important.
What's your quick thought about Beautiful? Oh, are you going to talk about your Jesus theory?
I think he's Jesus. I think he's Jesus in Beautiful. I think that he's Jesus. He does not know his father. His mother gives basically virgin or immaculate birth because there's no father figure. It's like God abandoned him on earth and his physical body quits on him. He performs miracles for a prophet. He's this in-between, can communicate between life and death. He has children with this Marumba character, like Mary Magdalene. She's a prostitute. And I just see all the little parallels. I think
Javier Bardem plays God the Father and Mother. He's playing God the Son in Beautiful. Yeah. Where's his spirit? We gotta see that.
Maybe
In
it's
this
Lyle Lyle
collateral.
Crocodile.
Lyle Crocodile.
Yeah,
And
no, Grace texted me this entire theory. I think
I
the
did.
late night after we recorded the episode, and I was just like,
Did.
what the hell are you smoking right now? And it was like nothing, just smoking movies.
Just high on my love of cinema. And I'll never come down.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's the counselor. That will wrap up this episode, though, of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter and Instagram at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we list all the movies that we talked about in this episode. If you would like to support the show, go to patreon.com/Cinematary. You can donate, be $5, $10, $1,000, or $1, whatever you feel we deserve.
Maybe if you're better than Michael Fassbender at committing, drug trafficking crimes, and you have a lot of extra cash hanging around,
send us some.
You could pay us in diamonds.
There you go. But thanks to our patrons, Cam, Ron Hayes, Tanner Huskins, Teresa Marthasathi, and Tyler Chandler. We appreciate your patronage. Next episode, we're going to conclude our Javier Bardem series with 2018's Everybody Knows, which kind of reminds me of that TikTok trend where they're like, everybody knows. That's what I kind of feel like with this title. But it's going to be an interesting one. It's English and Spanish, and it's directed by Asghar Farhadi. So,
is this one of the ones people say he plagiarized?
I don't know.
Hasn't he had a plagiarism scandal recently? Or is that someone else? I guess we'll find out next week.
And now there's slander involved.
Allegedly.
Okay, there we go.
Oh, he was cleared. Yeah, he was cleared of it.
Oh, really?
I think it was for a separation.
Okay. But he was
cleared of it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry.
It's the movie. The movie A Hero.
Okay.
They accused him of
I'm
There's
sorry.
some controversy around this one.
Dang, Michael.
I'm sorry for bringing up old wounds settled.
Bringing up old shit.
I like your movies, Mr. Farhadi.
Well, until next episode, where Michael will be on the episode, I guess, accusing him of plagiarism. Thank you for listening. We'll see you then.